June 6, 1944, 7 a.m. The English Channel churned violently as 9 British landing craft ploughed toward a thin strip of rocky beach at the base of 100-foot cliffs. Inside the boats, 225 American Rangers gripped rocket-propelled grappling hooks and rope ladders, their faces splattered with seawater and vomit. Above them loomed Point du Hoc, a jagged promontory that German defenders believed to be impregnable from the sea. One German officer had assessed the natural fortress with confidence. Elite commandos could never scale those cliffs under fire. Even some American intelligence officers agreed. "That can't be done," declared an officer on Rear Admiral John L. Hall's staff. 3 old women with brooms could keep the Rangers from climbing that cliff. What the skeptics didn't know was that Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, a 34-year-old former Texas football coach and high school teacher, had spent 6 months forging his volunteers into something the Germans had never encountered. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were Rangers, men who had washed out at 60% compared to 40% for regular infantry, men who had trained harder and longer than any assault troops in the American military, men who carried not just weapons, but the weight of the entire D-Day invasion on their shoulders. By 9 a.m. that morning, the Rangers would accomplish what German military planners had deemed impossible. They would scale those cliffs, while Germans above them fired machine guns, threw grenades, and cut their ropes. They would fight their way to the top, discover the guns had been moved, track them down inland and destroy them with thermite grenades. And they would hold their position for 2 brutal days against overwhelming German counterattacks until only 90 of the original 225 could still fight. The mathematics of that morning would be written in courage and blood. 100-foot cliff scaled in 10 minutes, 6 155mm guns neutralized, 70% casualties endured. 1 mission, the first Allied objective completed on D-Day, accomplished. The fortress that couldn't be taken. The Germans had chosen Point du Hoc for sound strategic reasons. The promontory jutted into the English Channel like a dagger, positioned perfectly between the American landing beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha. Allied intelligence reported 6 French-made 155mm howitzers positioned in reinforced concrete casemates atop the cliff. These guns had a range of 25,000 yards, over 12 miles, enough to rain destruction on both landing beaches and the thousands of ships in the channel. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself had inspected Point du Hoc as part of his Atlantic Wall defenses. The position was manned by elements of the German 352nd Infantry Division, one of the most capable units stationed in Normandy, along with the 2nd Battery of Army Coastal Artillery Battalion 1260. Approximately 200 German soldiers defended the site, confident in their fortifications and the natural barrier of the cliffs. The defenses were formidable. 6 massive concrete casemates, some with walls 6 to 10 feet thick, dominated the cliff top. Anti-aircraft artillery protected against air attack. Machine gun bunkers covered every approach. Wire entanglements and minefields ringed the position. Underground tunnels connected observation posts to firing positions, allowing German troops to pop up anywhere along the cliff edge. But the Germans' greatest confidence came from geography itself. The cliffs rose nearly perpendicular from the narrow beach below, approximately 100 feet of sheer limestone and clay, pockmarked by centuries of erosion. German commanders believed no force could scale those heights under fire. An assault from inland faced even worse obstacles: open fields covered by pre-sighted artillery, multiple defensive belts, and the full weight of the 352nd Division's reserves. The German defenders were so certain of their invulnerability that they prepared potato masher grenades and even rigged old 24mm artillery shells to roll down the cliffs triggered by tripwires, creating devastating shrapnel bursts. As one German engineer noted, "We assumed properly equipped enemy commandos could scale the steep cliffs, but they were confident such an attempt would be suicidal." The making of Rudder's Rangers. The journey to Point du Hoc began on April 1st, 1943, when the 2nd Ranger Battalion was activated at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The notice went out to Army camps across America. Volunteers wanted for a new type of unit, men with superior physical capabilities and high intelligence for hazardous duty. Thousands applied. Most were rejected. Those who made it to Camp Forest quickly understood what they'd volunteered for. The training was, as one ranger put it, 10 times more intense than training with the infantry. They ran until they collapsed. They lifted logs until their hands bled. They practiced hand-to-hand combat, mastered every weapon the Allies and Germans used, learned German language basics, and trained in amphibious landings. The battalion cycled through 4 commanders in 3 months before Major James Earl Rudder took command on June 30th, 1943. A genial man who had taught high school and coached football in Brady, Texas, Rudder proved to be exactly what the Rangers needed. He led by example, running every obstacle course with his men, sharing their hardships, holding monthly gripe sessions to address complaints. He was tough but fair, the kind of leader men would follow into hell. Under Rudder's command, the training intensified. The Rangers moved to Fort Pierce, Florida, for amphibious training at the Scout and Raiders School, living on insect-infested islands and practicing beach landings in rubber boats. They went to Camp Ritchie, Maryland for intelligence training on German weapons and tactics. Every phase weeded out more men. The washout rate of 60% meant that those who survived represented the absolute best. In December 1943, the 2nd Rangers shipped to England, still unaware of their ultimate mission. They settled in Boudet, Cornwall, on England's southwestern coast, where towering seaside cliffs up to 200 and 300 feet high provided the perfect training ground. British commando legend Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Trevor, an expert in cliff assault techniques, arrived to teach them specialized skills. The Rangers practiced with every climbing tool available: rocket-fired grappling hooks, rope ladders, extension ladders borrowed from the London Fire Department. They climbed in daylight and darkness, in calm weather and storms, carrying full combat loads. As Lieutenant George Kirchner recalled, "On us was placed the responsibility to prove that nothing was impossible. Our training was of a rare intensity." By May 1944, they were ready. The 2nd Rangers knew they would be climbing something, they just didn't know what. The most difficult task I've ever given any soldier. In mid-May 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Rudder and his executive officer, Major Max Schneider, were summoned to U.S. First Army headquarters at Bryanston Square in London. General Omar Bradley himself attended the briefing. Operations Officer Colonel Truman Thorson spread out aerial photographs and maps on the table. Point du Hoc, 6.155 guns in reinforced casemates, 100-foot cliffs, elite German defenders. When Thorson announced this would be the most dangerous mission of D-Day, Rudder thought it was a joke meant to scare him. It wasn't a joke. Bradley later wrote in his memoir A Soldier's Story, "No soldier in my command has ever been wished a more difficult task than that which befell the 34-year-old commander of this provisional ranger force. The plan that emerged was audacious to the point of madness. 3 companies of the 2nd Rangers, D, E, and F companies, totaling 225 men, would assault directly from the sea at H hour, 6:30 a.m. They would land on the narrow beach at the cliff's base, fire rocket-propelled grappling hooks to the summit, and scale the cliffs under fire. Once on top, they would destroy the guns and hold the position until reinforcements arrived. If Rudder's force succeeded in reaching the top and signaled with flares by 7 a.m., the rest of the Rangers, Companies A and B of the 2nd plus the entire 5th Ranger Battalion, roughly 500 additional men, would follow them up the cliffs. If no signal came by 7, those reinforcements would divert to Omaha Beach, leaving Rudder's 225 men isolated and unsupported. SHAEF headquarters estimated casualties as high as 70%. It was by any measure a suicide mission. The skeptics were vocal. Beyond the 3 old women with brooms comment, operational planners pointed out the obvious problems. The cliffs were too high, the Germans too well positioned, the beach too narrow, the entire concept too risky. If the Rangers got pinned down at the base of the cliffs, they would be massacred. If they reached the top but the guns were operational, they would be annihilated. If German reinforcements arrived before Allied support, they would be overrun. But Rudder had faith in his men, and his men had faith in him. The longest 40 minutes. At 4:05 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the troopship's PA systems crackled to life. "Rangers, man your craft. In the pre-dawn darkness, companies D, E, and F boarded 9 British crewed landing craft assault, LCAs, along with 4 DUKW amphibious trucks carrying extension ladders borrowed from London firefighters. Each Ranger carried 60 to 70 pounds of equipment, rifle or submachine gun, grenades including thermite grenades for destroying artillery, ammunition, rations, first aid kit and climbing gear. The hour-long journey to shore was hell. The channel was rough, with waves running 4 to 6 feet. Rangers became seasick. Water sloshed over the sides of the landing craft. Several men worked frantically with helmets and buckets to bail water, fearing the boats would sink. One supply LCA did sink, taking precious equipment to the bottom. Then came the navigation error that nearly doomed the mission. The flotilla's radar navigation system malfunctioned. Combined with strong currents and poor visibility, the boats headed toward Point de la Percée, 3 miles east of Point du Hoc. First Sergeant Leonard Lomel of D Company noticed something was wrong. Colonel Rudder and many of us had noticed that the point we were going to did not look like the point we studied. Rudder immediately recognized the error and ordered course correction. But precious time had been lost. Worse, the delay meant they would reach shore after 6:30 a.m., when naval gunfire support was scheduled to cease. They would have to run a 3-mile gauntlet parallel to the German-held coastline, under fire the entire way, before reaching their objective. The Rangers hunched low in their landing craft as German machine guns raked the water and mortars exploded around them. Men prayed. Men cursed. Men checked their weapons for the 10th time. At 7:10 a.m., 40 minutes late, the first landing craft ground onto the narrow beach at Point du Hoc. "Give me your grenades, Jack." As the ramps dropped, German machine gun fire erupted from the cliff tops. The Rangers poured out of the landing craft and sprinted across the thin strip of beach toward the base of the cliffs, splashing through bomb craters hidden beneath the water. Some men stepped into underwater craters and disappeared beneath the surface, struggling in the slippery clay bottoms while bullets churned the water above them. Lieutenant James Eichner, last off his boat, vividly recalled, "I ran down the ramp and in the water about up to my knees and headed across the narrow strip of beach. German grenades tumbled down from above, exploding among the Rangers. Machine gun fire ricocheted off the rocks, but the Rangers had one advantage the Germans hadn't anticipated: the massive Allied bombardment that preceded the landing. Weeks of airstrikes and the morning's naval gunfire from USS Texas, USS Satterley, and HMS Talibont had brought masses of clay and rock down from the cliff tops, creating ramps of rubble that allowed the Rangers to scramble partway up before reaching the sheer rock face. Rocket launchers boomed as grappling hooks with attached ropes shot toward the cliff edge. Many fell short. The ropes had become waterlogged during the rough channel crossing, adding critical weight. Germans appeared at the cliff edge, firing down at the climbers and cutting ropes with knives and entrenching tools. Grenades tumbled down among the Rangers. The Rangers kept climbing. When one rope was cut, a Ranger grabbed another. When one man fell, another took his place. Some climbed with only their hands and combat knives, jamming the blades into cracks in the rock face. The extension ladders from the DUKWs proved difficult to raise in the confined space, but eventually 2 were positioned against the cliff face. Supporting fire came from the destroyers offshore and from Rangers on the beach, who opened up with Browning automatic rifles, driving German defenders back from the cliff edge. The suppressive fire gave the climbers precious seconds. 10 minutes after touching shore, the first Ranger reached the summit. Lieutenant George Kirchner of D Company was among the first up. Years later, he recalled his vow as he approached France. "Okay, let's go," he had shouted before plunging into head-deep water. That aggressive spirit carried him up the cliff face, while Germans above him threw grenades and fired machine guns. Within 20 minutes of landing, enough Rangers had reached the cliff top to engage the German defenders in close combat. The element of surprise, such as it was given their late arrival, worked in their favor. The Germans had expected any assault to come from inland, not from the sea. They were caught off balance, and the Rangers' ferocious assault drove them back from the cliff edge. By 7:30 a.m., companies D, E, and F had secured a foothold atop Point du Hoc. Rudder's command post was established in a captured German bunker. Lieutenant Eichner and his communications team frantically worked to set up their radios to signal the reinforcements waiting offshore, but when the Rangers reached the massive concrete casemates they had studied for months, they found them empty. The Germans had placed wooden poles draped with camouflage netting to deceive Allied aerial reconnaissance. The 155-meter guns were gone. The mission appeared to be a failure. Men had died climbing the cliffs to destroy guns that weren't there. But First Sergeant Leonard Bud Lommel wasn't ready to give up. Jack, here they are, after helping establish a defensive perimeter along the coastal road, south of Point du Hoc, the Rangers' secondary. Objective to prevent German reinforcements from moving between Utah and Omaha beaches, Lommel and staff. Sergeant Jack Kuhn formed a two-man patrol to search for the missing guns. Lommel noticed deep tire tracks in a sunken farm road leading inland. It looked like something heavy had been over it, he later recalled. Following the track south roughly 250 yards from the coastal highway, Lommel suddenly stopped and held out his hand to halt Kuhn. Jack, here they are. We've found them. Here are the goddamned guns. Hidden in an apple orchard under camouflage netting sat 5 of the 6 155mm howitzers, emplaced in firing positions aimed at Utah Beach. Ammunition was stacked nearby. The guns were fully operational and ready to fire. The German gun crews had withdrawn about 100 meters away, apparently waiting for their infantry to drive the Rangers back so they could safely man their weapons. Lommel didn't hesitate. "Give me your grenades, Jack," he said to Kuhn. "Cover me. I'm gonna fix them." While Kuhn provided security, Lommel ran to the guns and jammed thermite grenades into the recoil mechanisms, traversing gears and elevating mechanisms of 2 guns. The thermite, a compound that burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, would weld the moving parts together, rendering the weapons permanently inoperable. Lommel smashed the sights on a 3rd gun with his rifle butt. "Jack, we gotta get some more thermite grenades." The 2 Rangers sprinted back to the highway, collected all the thermite grenades from nearby Rangers, and returned to the battery. Lommel destroyed the remaining guns while members of E Company found the 6th gun and destroyed it as well. Then they set off the massive ammunition dump with a tremendous explosion that sent a column of smoke into the sky. It was approximately 9 a.m. The mission was complete. The Rangers had become the first Allied unit to accomplish its D-Day objective, at extraordinary cost. Praise the Lord never came. Back at sea, Lieutenant Colonel Max Schneider and the 500 Rangers of Force C waited anxiously for the signal to follow Rudder's assault force up the cliffs. The code words were specific. Praise the Lord meant success. Proceed to Point du Hoc. Tilt meant failure. Divert to Omaha Beach by 7:13 a.m. Rudder's communications team had managed to radio Tilt to headquarters, but through the chaos and static, Schneider's force never received clear confirmation of Rudder's situation. When 7 a.m. passed without the flares or the Praise the Lord signal, Schneider made the decision called for in the operations order: divert to Omaha Beach. It was the right call operationally, but it meant Rudder's 225 Rangers at Point du Hoc would have to hold alone, and the Germans were coming. 2 days in hell. The 352nd Infantry Division recognized the threat immediately. Rangers had penetrated the Atlantic Wall at its most formidable point and were now astride the coastal highway, preventing reinforcements from moving between the landing beaches. German commanders organized immediate counterattacks. Starting on the afternoon of June 6th, German infantry and artillery began systematic attempts to dislodge the Rangers. The 1st Battalion of the 914th Grenadier Regiment, supported by elements of other units, launched multiple assaults against the Rangers' positions. The Rangers established a defensive perimeter roughly 600 yards deep, using the same bomb craters and German bunkers that had hindered their assault to create defensive strongpoints. Lieutenant Colonel Rudder, wounded twice but refusing evacuation, coordinated the defense from his bunker command post. Ammunition ran low. Medical supplies dwindled. The Rangers used captured German weapons and ammunition when their own ran out. Naval gunfire from destroyers offshore provided critical support. When German infantry formed up for attacks, Rangers directed fire from USS Satterlee and other ships, breaking up the assaults before they could overrun the thin American line. But the naval gunfire couldn't stop everything. On the night of June 6-7, Company D's position on the western flank was overrun. 20 Rangers under Sergeant Petty stayed behind to cover the withdrawal of 50 comrades and were captured. The German pressure was relentless. Rudder sent repeated messages requesting ammunition and reinforcements. Sommes à Point du Hoc. Mission accomplie. Munitions et renforts nécessaires. Beaucoup de pertes. We are at Point du Hoc. Mission accomplished. Ammunition and reinforcements needed. Many casualties. The response came back from USS Satterley. Aucun renfort disponible. Tous les Rangers sont déployés. No reinforcements available. All Rangers are deployed. The Rangers were alone. They dug deeper, fought harder, and held. On June 7th, a small relief force arrived, survivors from Company A of the 5th Ranger Battalion, who had landed at Omaha Beach and fought their way west along the coast. This brought Rudder's effective fighting strength to approximately 85 men from the original 225. The Germans continued attacking. Artillery fire pounded the Ranger positions. Snipers picked off exposed men. Several more counterattacks crashed against the defensive perimeter. Each was beaten back with rifles, machine guns, mortars, and grim determination. The Rangers, trained to assault, proved equally capable of defense. Finally, on the morning of June 8th at approximately 11 a.m., relief arrived. Tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion and 2 companies from the 5th Ranger Battalion fought through from Omaha Beach and linked up with Rudder's men at Point du Hoc. Of the original 225 Rangers, who had landed on June 6th, only 90 could still fight. The battalion had suffered a 70% casualty rate, 77 killed, 152 wounded, 38 missing. Every officer and NCO in D Company was either killed or wounded. It was the price of the first Allied success on D-Day. The transformation from mockery to legend. The immediate aftermath of Point du Hoc brought controversy. Some early reports characterized the assault as a wasted effort because the guns were not in their prepared positions. Critics suggested the Rangers had fought and died for nothing, that the mission could have been avoided if aerial reconnaissance had been more accurate. These critics fundamentally misunderstood what the Rangers accomplished. Operational analysis later confirmed that the guns, though moved, were fully functional and positioned to fire on Utah Beach. The German gun crews were assembled nearby, waiting to man their weapons. Had Lommel and Kuhn not found and destroyed those guns, they could have devastated the Utah Beach landings and the fleet in the Channel. The Rangers' mission was not wasted. It was absolutely critical. Moreover, the Rangers' seizure of the coastal highway prevented German reinforcements from moving freely between Utah and Omaha beaches during the critical first hours of the invasion. This disruption of German defensive coordination contributed significantly to the success of both landing beaches. The Rangers at Point du Hoc held a toehold in Fortress Europe when the outcome of D-Day hung in the balance. They accomplished their mission under conditions that military planners had deemed impossible, and they paid in blood for every foot of ground they held. For his actions at Point du Hoc, Lieutenant Colonel Rudder received the Distinguished Service Cross. First Sergeant Leonard Lommel also received the Distinguished Service Cross for finding and destroying the E guns. Historian Stephen Ambrose would later call Lommel the single individual other than Dwight Eisenhower most responsible for the Allied success on D-Day. 13 other Rangers received the Distinguished Service Cross for heroism at Point du Hoc. The 2nd Ranger Battalion was awarded a Presidential Unit Citation for the operation. But the greatest recognition came 40 years later. These are the boys of Point du Hoc. On June 6, 1984, President Ronald Reagan stood atop the cliffs of Point du Hoc with 62 surviving Rangers seated before him. In one of the most moving speeches of his presidency, Reagan honored their sacrifice. We stand on a lonely, windswept point on the northern shore of France. The air is soft, but 40 years ago at this moment the air was dense with smoke and the cries of men, and the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire and the roar of cannon. These are the boys of Point du Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. These are the heroes who helped end a war. Reagan continued. The Rangers looked up and saw the enemy soldiers at the edge of the cliffs, shooting down at them with machine guns and throwing grenades. And the American Rangers began to climb. They shot rope ladders over the face of these cliffs and began to pull themselves up. When one ranger fell, another would take his place. When one rope was cut, a ranger would grab another and begin his climb again. They climbed, shot back, and held their footing. Soon, one by one, the rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. The president's words captured what military analysis alone could not: the human dimension of courage under fire, the brotherhood of men who refused to fail each other, the transformation of ordinary Americans into extraordinary heroes. Leonard Lomel, attending the ceremony at age 64, later reflected on that day with typical modesty. "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice about what Americans could do. And we won." The legacy of the impossible mission today, Point du Hoc, remains, much as the Rangers left it in 1944. The bomb craters still pockmark the landscape. The shattered concrete casemates still stand as monuments to the fury of the Allied bombardment. The cliff face, though eroded by 80 years of wind and wave, still rises impossibly steep from the narrow beach below. The site is administered by the American Battle Monuments Commission and attracts thousands of visitors each year. A simple granite pylon atop a German bunker commemorates the Rangers' achievement. The inscription reads in French and English: "Here on June 6, 1944, elements of the American 2nd Ranger Battalion under the command of Lieutenant James E. Rudder scaled these cliffs and seized the German artillery pieces that could have fired on the American landing. Troops at Omaha and Utah beaches." The statistics of Point du Hoc tell one story. The mission: 225 Rangers assault from sea, 100-foot cliffs scaled under fire. 10 minutes to first man on top. 20 minutes to establish foothold. 155 military guns destroyed. First Allied objective completed on D-Day. The cost: 77 Rangers killed, 152 Rangers wounded, 38 Rangers missing, 70% casualty rate, only 90 fit for duty after 48 hours. The recognition: 1 Presidential Unit Citation for 2nd Ranger Battalion, 14 Distinguished Service Crosses awarded, 1st Congressional Gold Medal to Rudder, posthumous 2007. Countless Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts, but numbers cannot capture the full measure of what happened on that cliff face on June 6, 1944. The Rangers at Point du Hoc represent something fundamental about the American character. When told something is impossible, Americans have a habit of doing it anyway. The German defenders were well-trained, well-equipped, and positioned in one of the strongest natural fortresses in Europe. They had every advantage except one: they had never faced men like Rudder's Rangers. The 3 old women with brooms, who supposedly could have stopped the Rangers, never materialized. Instead, the Rangers faced the full might of the German Wehrmacht and climbed anyway. They absorbed 70% casualties and held anyway. They were outnumbered, outgunned, isolated, and abandoned, and they accomplished their mission anyway. The mockery that preceded Point du Hoc, the skepticism, the it-can't-be-done attitude, the dismissal of American fighting spirit, died on those cliffs on June 6, 1944. In its place emerged respect, earned at terrible cost, validated by victory. James Earl Rudder returned to Texas after the war, eventually becoming president of Texas A&M University. He rarely spoke of Point du Hoc, bearing his memories in silence. When he returned to France in 1954 with his teenage son Bud, father and son hired a fishing boat and approached Point du Hoc from the sea, just as the Rangers had. Looking up at those cliffs, the son said, "I could not conceive that they had climbed those cliffs and fought their way up those cliffs while being shot at. But they did. Because they were Rangers, because Rudder believed in them, because the mission demanded it, because failure was not an option. The Rangers at Point du Hoc didn't just take a German strongpoint. They proved that courage, training, and determination could overcome any obstacle. They demonstrated that American soldiers, given proper leadership and motivation, could accomplish the impossible. They helped ensure the success of D-Day and the liberation of Europe, and they showed that sometimes, when everything is at stake, when the odds are impossible, when the skeptics say it can't be done, sometimes the right men find a way. Rangers lead the way.